topic is defining entropy.
So my presentation is on my honors thesis, which is a collection of poems called Defining Entropy. So when I first started working on kind of thinking about what exactly I wanted to do with my thesis, I kind of kept coming back to a couple main points. First of all, I wanted something that would be able to combine my biology and English majors, but I also wanted something that would feel like kind of a next step after two first-go writing projects, one of which was a fiction piece and the other of which was nonfiction. I also wanted to try and create absolutely as many creative writing projects as possible before heading off to veterinary school next semester when time for creative writing is going to become very scarce. So at some point during all of this, it kind of pops into my head of, well, why not try and combine science and poetry? And obviously this sounds like kind of a terrible idea right off the bat. Science and poetry are supposed to be opposites. But the more you really start digging into kind of the heart of both science and poetry, the more it becomes apparent that they really are very closely connected, and they're both very much facets of our species' attempt to try and understand how and why we exist. So the more I started looking into the history of science and poetry, the more I kind of started to realize that combining them really isn't all that original of an idea. A lot of poems that have really managed to stand the test of time are in some way or another invested in kind of a scientific view of reality. A great example of a poem that's been with us for centuries is Shakespeare's Sonnet 130, which begins with the lines, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red," and ends with the absolutely fantastic closing couplet of, "And yet by heaven I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare." So basically he's kind of taking that idea of poetry saying, oh, her lips are as red as rubies, her skin is as white as the snow, and saying, you know, that doesn't actually reflect any sort of scientific reality. And his kind of honesty about science and reality then makes his love for his mistress so much more relatable that we've been reading this poem since Elizabethan times. And then on the flip side of that, many of our most beloved science books, in some way or another, are kind of invested in this more or less poetic idea of human wonder and existence. For a great example of this is Stephen Hawking's bestseller, A Brief History of Time, which he ends with a discussion of what it would mean for humanity if we ever do work out a kind of unified theory of physics. And he says, then we shall all, philosophers, scientists, and just ordinary people, be able to take part in the discussion of why it is that we and the universe exist. So he's basically saying that our ability to understand ourselves will be every bit as important to humanity's future as our ability to understand quantum mechanics. So this project specifically consists of 10 poems, an introductory essay, and then a discussion of each of the individual poems and the creative process that went into each of them. They all have very different subject matter and kind of focus on different themes, but they're all unified by the idea of life existing in an inherently and increasingly chaotic universe. And then this project was incredibly challenging to complete and involved a lot of late nights and an awful lot of hair tearing out, but it really was a kind of invaluable way to kind of reflect back on why poetry and literature and science together have been so important to my education and hopefully So then I played with a couple different forms over the course of this project. My personal favorite was one I actually ended up coming up with that I titled DNA Acrostic, which basically ends up, the structure of the poem then mimics the way DNA stores genetic information. So specifically, all the lines start with A, C, G, or T. They're broken into 3-line stanzas to make codons that then spell out something in single-letter amino acid code. So someone finally gets it. So I wrote 2 poems in this form, and I bookended the collection with them, and then together they spell out "Everything Always Ends," which was the shortest and crucially easiest to spell definition of entropy that I could come up with. Then beyond that, I played with a couple fixed forms, some free verse, and then a prose poem as well. So the first poem I have to read today is one of the DNA poems, and it kind of deals with the relationship between written language and then the way genetic information is stored, and it's called Linear Language. Go back to the beginning of us, of life, a few wisps of primordial order and clusters of replicating patterns of atoms. Go back to the start of this, of us, the startled or triumphant cry, converting an instant into repeatable sound. Going forward, how could we alter our path toward entropy, gaining order at the cost of form and passion. Amino acids twine into webbing intricacies, graceful as heavy-hanging storm clouds, and our cells and minds store them as simple lines. These lines will never crash like sea cliffs, and bases only spiral and untwine, coding for active sites and rearing walls of black water, awaiting the release of translation contained by the covenant with chaos to simplify shattering heat and spraying ice, convert raging winds and broiling skies and the frenzy of sleeting rain to the innocent symbols of storm and hurricane. Although a gene serves well enough to store the sequence of an enzyme, the catalytic action is left to the ribosome's imagination. All I could say to you is bound up in lines. All you could make of it is spiraled in chords. They are the price of being and saying. Guess at the meanings, generate your calm from insatiable chaos. Go where you will, you live only in this language of lines. And so then, as I said, the left-hand margin forms codons that then, I promise if you get a codon table out, do spell everything. I did check this before. So then the next poem I did was the fourth poem I wrote for the collection, but it was the first one that I kind of read back through it and said, yeah, that's kind of what I want to say with the whole project. And so it kind of became kind of a centering, guiding point for the rest of the collection. And it's called Heat Death of a Love Poem. 1. We too exist, I think, because our cells are brimful of mitochondria, little patron saints of not letting things crumble into shards and scraps just yet. Our prayers for something like love are answered in the conversion of ADP to ATP, chemical charm against entropy, future freeing of a phosphate in a burst of cellular work and heat that shimmers out from our heads and palms, anticipating a time when all energy is thermal and there is nothing left for us or time to measure. I can love your limbs for these artful little rebellions, even as the heat of your breath belies the futility of our halo-bound organized efforts. 2. In an infinite number of chaotic states of matter and people and late winter days, there is a sort of order to our skin-close breathing, to trusting the brush of your arm against mine, hairs raised in a prickling burst of breaking ATP bonds. Over the coming days and years, I will try to organize these made-sense moments in my mind, to sort your nebula-bright eyes and book-smart smile into something like the conventional idea of love, paying for the effort and heat freely spilled out to keep time running towards chaos, our conventional forwards. 3. Now, this embrace, arms pressing into the protruding circuitry of spines as if to hold in the heat that will be the death of us. So then the last poem I have today kind of has a good story behind it. So about a month after I got my current horse, Owen, I was assigned for my microbiology lab to take a bacterial sample from somewhere so then we could practice identifying different species within that sample. So naturally, I took a gum line swab from him to see what was going on with that. And it actually ended up being less disgusting than the pre-dental student in my lab, so good on Owen. And then, so as I was kind of characterizing all these kind of common but potentially very harmful bacteria from his gum line, I was also kind of coming to grips with like this new relationship, figuring out how much I could trust him, learning about his history as a very much failed racehorse, and kind of building up this relationship. And it kind of all gelled together into something that seemed like a good idea for a poem, but instead of trying to make that a poem about a horse, I kind of transferred the specifics onto a more human relationship in a poem called Flora. You came in handy again. As your lips faked a smile, I ran the swab along your gum line, just where enamel and flesh met. You kept smiling as I streaked the damp white cotton over the agar. One more plate for the project, one more tight-lipped smile between us. It was one of the only samples that grew, important because your little bacterial cells flowered into corpse-gray colonies in the perfected and synthetic world of the Petri dish. If I'd had a bit more time, I could have told you what you'd eaten, when you'd slept, and all the little practicalities I might have guessed, just by what grew from your gum line. I categorized the little clusters of life by the Latin names given when they were first found in another time, in another host, and left it at that. Left out what they could have told, what I didn't ask. Later, I told you the seeds of pneumonia or worse were lurking behind your lips, waiting for a break in the balance we depend on. You said it was better not to know. I said that's what it is. And you smiled like the old photo I'd found of an unknown you, pink-tie dapper at some Ohio racetrack, faking a smile at having won a few bucks off guessing right, at getting lucky, at shoving the odds from your mind, pretending not to know how wrong it could go. Pretending the world was made just for us, to spit out copies of the same stories starring us, over and over, precise as cellular division, letting me list and never know what lives behind your smile. So I would like to thank the honors program for letting me do this thesis, Dr. Snitter and Dr. Mesa for being very helpful on my committee, Dr. Collar for being my advisor and for being a wonderful friend and mentor over the past 4 years at Albion, and my horse Owen for bacterial samples and getting me through the Are there any questions? Okay. Yes?
Are you familiar with Thomas Pynchon's short story entitled Entropy?
No, I'm not.
You would appreciate it.
Okay.